sound of a heartbeat is deafening when you are lying in the dirt waiting to die. It wasn't the gunfire that Caleb heard anymore, nor the screaming of the wind through the Hindu Kush Valley. It was just the thump, thump, thump in his own ears, slower now, heavier, like a war drum signaling the end of an empire. 2 hours ago, the world had been loud. 2 hours ago, Sergeant Caleb Vance and his recon unit had been moving through the craggy, unforgiving spine of the Kunar province, ghosts in the mist, tracking a high-value target that Command promised was unguarded. Command was wrong. It wasn't a patrol, it was a hornet's nest. The ambush hadn't started with a shot. It started with the silence breaking, the mountains themselves seeming to erupt in fire. The RPG that hit the lead vehicle didn't just destroy metal, it shattered the unit's cohesion. In the dust and the shouting, amidst the scramble for cover and the roar of air support that was too far away to help, Caleb had taken a round to the thigh and tumbled down a shale ravine, rolling, sliding, crashing through scrub brush and sharp rocks until the darkness swallowed him whole.
Now, the silence had returned, but it was a heavy, suffocating silence. Caleb tried to move, but his legs screamed in protest, a white-hot lance of agony that made his vision blur. He looked down. His uniform was dark with blood. The desert camouflage stained a deep, terrifying crimson. He checked his radio. Dead air. The fall had cracked the casing. He was 5,000 miles from home, alone in the most hostile terrain on Earth, bleeding out in a ditch while the enemy hunted the ridges above. He gripped his rifle, his knuckles white. He had 3 magazines left. He promised himself he wouldn't go quietly. He checked the sun. It was dipping below the peaks, casting long, jagged shadows that looked like grasping fingers. If the cold didn't kill him tonight, the blood loss would. Or the Taliban. He closed his eyes for a second, thinking of his daughter back in Texas, the way she looked in her Sunday dress, the smell of rain on hot asphalt. He forced his eyes open. Not yet. He dragged himself under the overhang of a large boulder, trying to make himself small, trying to become part of the mountain. Hours passed. The temperature plummeted. His teeth began to chatter, uncontrollable spasms that racked his injured body. He drifted in and out of consciousness, vivid hallucinations of home mixing with the harsh reality of the stone pressing against his back.
Then he heard it, the snap of a twig, the shifting of loose gravel. Not the wind. Footsteps. Caleb tightened his grip on the M4, lifting the barrel with trembling hands. He held his breath, fighting the dizziness. A silhouette appeared against the moonlight. It wasn't a soldier in tactical gear. It was a figure, wrapped in a heavy wool shawl, a patu, moving with the sure-footed grace of a mountain goat. Caleb exhaled, his finger tightening on the trigger. If he fired, he gave away his position to everyone in the valley. If he didn't, the stranger might slit his throat.
The figure stopped. A man. He was old, his beard like spun silver in the moonlight, his face a map of deep lines etched by the sun and wind. He held a simple wooden staff, and behind him, navigating the rocks, were 3 goats. The man turned his head, his eyes scanning the shadows. He saw the boot first, then the rifle. Caleb tried to raise the weapon higher, to shout a warning, but his voice was a dry croak. Don't move, he whispered, the English words useless here. The old man didn't flinch. He didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. He stood still, looking at the American soldier, then at the blood pooling on the rocks. The tension stretched, thin and brittle as ice. In these mountains, an American was an invader, an enemy, a target. The man took a step forward. Caleb tried to aim, but his strength failed him. The rifle barrel dipped. He slumped back, his vision tunneling. The last thing he saw before the blackness took him completely was the old man kneeling beside him, not with a knife, but with a hand reaching out to touch his forehead. When Caleb woke, the air smelled of wood smoke and unwashed wool. He panicked, thrashing, his hand grasping for a weapon that wasn't there. A sharp pain shot up his leg, pinning him to the ground. He gasped, looking around wildly. He was inside a structure. Mud walls, a low ceiling supported by wooden beams, a small fire crackling in the corner. He was lying on a rug, thick and patterned with deep reds and blues. His leg. He looked down. His tactical pants had been cut away. The wound was bound tightly with clean strips of white cloth, smelling of herbs and something pungent. He wasn't dead. He wasn't in a cage. He was a guest. The wooden door creaked open, and the old man entered, carrying a copper pot. He saw Caleb was awake and nodded, a slight dip of his turbaned head. He said something in Pashto, the voice gravelly but soft. Caleb shook his head. I don't understand, he rasped.
The man set the pot down and poured a dark, steaming liquid into a small glass. Tea. He offered it. Caleb hesitated. Poison? A drug? But the thirst was a physical weight in his throat. He took the glass, his hands shaking so bad the liquid sloshed over the rim. He drank. It was sweet, hot, and life-affirming. The old man sat cross-legged opposite him, watching with dark, intelligent eyes. He tapped his own chest. Rahim, he said. Caleb lowered the glass. Caleb, he whispered. Caleb. Rahim repeated the name, testing the weight of it on his tongue. He pointed to the door, then made a slashing motion across his throat, then pointed to the mountains. The message was clear. They are looking for you. They will kill you.
For 3 days, Caleb existed in a twilight state of pain and healing. Rahim was his only contact with the world. The old man was a ghost in his own village, moving quietly, bringing food, flatbread that tasted like ash and earth, goat cheese, more of the sweet tea. He changed Caleb to bandages with hands that were rough like sandpaper, but incredibly gentle. He crushed leaves into a poultice that burned like fire, but drew the heat out of the infection. They couldn't speak, not really. They communicated in gestures, in expressions. Caleb learned that Rahim was a widower, that the goats were his livelihood, and that his son had been killed years ago. By Russians? By Taliban? By Americans? Caleb didn't know. He only saw the grief in the man's eyes when he looked at a faded photograph pinned to the wall. The danger was always there. It hung in the air like smoke. During the day, Caleb could hear voices outside. Sometimes the roar of a motor. Once, the distinct, terrifying chop of a helicopter, far off in the distance. He wanted to run out, to signal it, but he couldn't walk, and Rahim held him down with a firm hand, shaking his head. Not yet. Too dangerous. Caleb realized with a sinking feeling that he was a liability. If the Taliban found him here, they wouldn't just kill him. They would kill Rahim. They would burn this house to the ground and slaughter his family for the crime of harboring an infidel. Why? Caleb asked one evening, pointing at himself, then at the door, then at Rahim. Why help me? Rahim paused, breaking a piece of bread. He looked at Caleb, then pointed to the sky, then placed his hand over his heart. Melmastia. Caleb didn't know the word then, but he felt the meaning. Hospitality. The code of the mountains. A guest is under the protection of the host, even if that guest is an enemy. To harm a guest is to shame one's soul.
On the fourth night, the war came to the door. Caleb was awakened by shouting outside. Angry, guttural voices, the heavy pounding of a rifle butt against the wooden gate of the compound. Rahim was up instantly. He didn't look at Caleb. He grabbed his shawl and walked out into the courtyard, closing the heavy wooden door behind him. Caleb dragged himself to the corner of the room, grabbing a heavy stone from the fireplace. It was pathetic, but it was all he had. He pressed his ear to the wood. He could hear the conversation. It was heated. A younger voice, sharp and demanding, shouting over the wind. Rahim's voice was lower, calm, unyielding like the mountain stone. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew what was happening.
They knew someone was here. They were demanding to search the house. Caleb gripped the rock, his knuckles white. He prepared himself to spring, to fight, to draw the fire away from the old man. If they came through that door, he would scream. He would make them shoot him. Anything to spare the man who had fed him. The shouting escalated, the sound of a weapon being cocked. Then, silence. A long, terrifying silence that stretched for an eternity. Caleb stopped breathing. Had they killed him? Was he lying dead in the dirt?
Then, the sound of footsteps receding, an engine starting up, the noise fading into the night. The door opened. Rahim stood there. He looked older, tired. There was a bruise forming on his cheekbone, dark and angry. He locked the door and sat down heavily. He looked at Caleb and let out a long breath. He didn't say a word about the confrontation. He just poured the tea. But Caleb saw the tremor in the old man's hand. He realized then that this wasn't just kindness. This was defiance. Rahim was waging his own war, a war of principle against brutality. He was risking everything for a stranger whose language he didn't speak, whose God he didn't pray to. Caleb felt a lump form in his throat, a surge of gratitude so powerful it hurt. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the only thing of value he had left, his silver St. Christopher medal, the patron saint of travelers. He held it out. Rahim looked at it, confused. Caleb pressed it into the old man's hand, closing his fingers over it. "Thank you," Caleb said, his voice cracking. Rahim looked at the silver disc, then tucked it into the folds of his tunic, near his heart.
By the 6th day, Caleb could stand. He hobbled around the small room, testing the leg. It held. The infection had receded, leaving a jagged, angry scar, but the fever was gone. Rahim watched him, nodding approval. That afternoon, Rahim brought something that made Caleb's heart stop, a radio. It wasn't Caleb's broken military comms, it was an old, battered civilian handheld, the kind used by truckers or insurgents. Rahim handed it to him. He pointed to the north, toward the higher peaks. "Signal," he said. It was the first English word he had spoken. Caleb stared at him. "Signal?" Rahim nodded vigorously. "American. Bird." He flapped his arms. "Go." He was telling Caleb to call for extraction. He was telling him it was time to leave. Caleb took the radio. He knew the frequencies. He knew the codes. But he also knew that calling in a bird meant bringing the violence right to Rahim's doorstep. "If I call," Caleb gestured, "bad men come." He pointed to the door. Rahim gripped Caleb's shoulder. His eyes were fierce. "Go," he said again. "Family, go." Caleb turned the dial. Static. He adjusted the squelch. More static. He limped to the small window, holding the antenna up. He keyed the mic. Any station, this is Viper 26, transmitting in the blind. Do you copy? Over." Static. He tried again. Viper 26, wounded, alone, grid reference. He recited the coordinates from memory, praying he was right. "Need immediate extraction, hot LZ, do you copy?" Nothing. He slumped against the wall. Then a crackle, a voice cutting through the snow like a razor. "Viper 26, this is Highlander Actual. We read you 5x5. Authentication required. Over." Caleb nearly wept. "Authentication. Whiskey. Tango. Foxtrot. 9-9. Copy, Viper 26. Keep your head down, buddy. We are inbound. ETA 20 mics. Pop smoke if you have it." "Negative on smoke. I'm in a compound. White flag on the roof. I repeat, friendly in the compound. Copy. 20 mics. Hang tough."
20 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. Rahim knew. He didn't need to understand the words to know the tone of a rescue. He began to move quickly, extinguishing the fire, grabbing a small bag of food he had prepared. He handed Caleb his walking stick. They moved to the courtyard. The sun was high, the light blinding. The village was quiet, suspiciously so. The wind howled through the valley, masking the sound of the approaching rotors until they were almost on top of them. Then the world exploded. A bullet chipped the mud wall inches from Caleb's face, spraying dust into his eyes. The crack of the rifle followed a split second later from the ridge above. The Taliban. They had been watching. They had been waiting for him to emerge. "Inside!" Caleb screamed, shoving Rahim back. But Rahim stood his ground, raising his old bolt-action rifle, aiming at the ridge. He fired, cycled the bolt, fired again. More shots rang out, pinging off the stones, tearing through the wooden door. They were pinned down. "Go!" Rahim shouted, pointing to the back wall where a small gap had been eroded by rain. "Go!" "I'm not leaving you!" Caleb yelled, firing his last magazine toward the muzzle flashes on the hill. "Go!" Rahim grabbed Caleb's vest and shoved him with surprising strength. "Live!" The sound of the heavy machine guns started then. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the extraction helicopters. 2 Blackhawks and an Apache gunship crested the mountain, dark angels of vengeance. The Apache immediately opened up, its 30mm chain gun tearing into the ridgeline, silencing the enemy fire in a cloud of dust and rock. The ground shook as the lead Blackhawk flared for a landing in the small clearing outside the village, kicking up a blinding brownout of sand.
Caleb scrambled through the hole in the wall, dragging his bad leg. He turned back. Rahim was there, in the breach, firing at a group of insurgents rushing the compound from the east. He was holding the line. He was buying time. "Rahim!" Caleb screamed, the rotor wash drowning out his voice. An American special operator sprinted through the dust, grabbing Caleb by the vest. "Let's go! Let's go! Move!" "Wait! The old man!" Caleb pointed. "We have to get him." The operator looked. The compound was taking heavy fire. The Apache was making another run, rockets streaking from its pods, obliterating the attackers. But the wall where Rahim stood was disintegrating. "We can't. LZ is too hot. We have to lift now." Caleb fought, but he was weak, and the operator was strong. He was dragged toward the open door of the Blackhawk. He was thrown inside onto the metal floor. The crew chief opened up with the minigun, a stream of brass casings raining down on Caleb. As the helicopter lifted, the stomach-churning lurch of gravity letting go, Caleb crawled to the door. He looked down. The compound was a ruin. But there, in the courtyard, standing amidst the dust and the debris, was a figure. Rahim. He wasn't firing anymore. He was leaning on his staff, looking up at the bird. He raised his hand. A wave. A goodbye. And then the dust swallowed him. Caleb collapsed back against the bulkhead, the adrenaline crashing, leaving him empty. The medic was cutting his pants, sticking an IV, talking fast, but Caleb didn't hear him. He just stared at the roof of the chopper, the vibration rattling his teeth. He was alive. He was going home. But he had left his heart in a mud hut on the side of a mountain. 5 years later. The Texas sun was hot, but it felt different than the heat of the Kunar province. It was humid, thick with the smell of barbecue and cut grass. Caleb stood on his back porch, watching his daughter play in the sprinkler. She was 10 now. She didn't remember the time he almost didn't come back. She only knew that her dad walked with a cane sometimes when it rained, and that he didn't like fireworks. Caleb took a sip of his iced tea. He walked back into the house, into his study. On the wall, surrounded by framed medals and commendations, was a simple wooden shadow box. Inside, it didn't hold a bronze star or a purple heart, although he had those too. It held a picture. A grainy satellite photo of a small village in the mountains. And next to it, a letter. It had taken him 3 years of red tape, of calling in favors, of working with NGOs and private contractors. He had to know. He couldn't sleep until he knew. He had sent money, an obscene amount of money by Afghan standards, through a secure channel directed to the village elder of that specific grid coordinate. He had sent a message, for the shepherd who guards the guest. The reply had come months later, via a grainy video file on an encrypted drive. Caleb sat down at his desk and clicked the file on his computer, just as he did every Sunday. The video played. It was shaky, filmed on a cheap phone, but the face was clear. Rahim. He looked older, more tired, but his eyes were the same, dark and intelligent. He was standing in front of a new house, a sturdy one with a metal roof. A new herd of goats bleated in the background. He was holding up a piece of paper. On it, drawn in charcoal, was a crude sketch of a soldier, and around his neck, glinting in the sun, was the silver St. Christopher medal. Rahim spoke to the camera. The translator's voiceover played softly through the speakers. "Tell the American, tell Caleb, the guest is always welcome. The mountains remember. I remember." Caleb smiled, a genuine, tear-filled smile. He wasn't just a soldier who survived. He was a man who had witnessed the best of humanity in the worst of places. He had learned that honor isn't about flags or uniforms. It isn't about orders. It's about a choice. The choice to see a human being when the world tells you to see an enemy. The choice to open a door when it's safer to keep it locked. He touched the screen. "Thank you, brother," he whispered. The war was over for Caleb, but the lesson remained. In a world tearing itself apart, kindness was the only weapon that really mattered. And somewhere in the high peaks of the Hindu Kush, a shepherd was watching the sunset, knowing that his mercy had echoed halfway across the world. If you enjoyed this story of survival, brotherhood, and the unbreakable code of honor, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And here is the question for you guys. What would you have done if you were Rahim? Would you have risked your family to save an enemy soldier? Let me know in the comments below. If you love military stories, history, and tales of incredible heroism, make sure you subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss a video. We have new stories coming every week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and remember, history is written by the victors, but humanity is defined by the survivors. See you in the next one.